So I got some new switches. To be more specific, I got the Haimu Pastel Flan switches, a switch that I blindly bought because of a dude on the internet in an attempt to cure my desperate desire for a good out-of-the-box pre-lubed switch. You see, I've been on the search to find the perfect linear switch for a while now, but time and time again, every switch I find falls short in at least one way, and the switches that seem perfect are simply just out of my price range. And while I don't have the biggest collection and haven't been able to try out the top luxury switches out there, I have been able to learn what I do and don't like with what I do have. It's pretty simple. I like a solid performing, well-priced switch, and I absolutely hate lubing them. So because of that, I settled for the KTD strawberries. They're very nice stock and don't break the bank. But they still left me wanting more. So that leads us here. The Canon Keys X Haimu Pastel Flan linear switch. A pre-lubed linear switch at a pretty fair price point. Will these be the perfect out-of-the-box switch I was looking for? How do they compare to the popular KTD strawberries? And wait, where did this pink one come from? I didn't order that. I'm gonna keep an eye on him. Anyways, this video is sponsored by PCBWay. PCBWay is your one-stop shop for all your custom project needs. Whether that's CNC machining, 3D printing, sheet metal fabrication, injection molding, and of course, custom PCBs, they got you covered all at competitive prices. Make your own projects come to life, or use open source designs, it's all up to you. Check out PCBWay in the description, and let's continue. So I love flan, like the dessert. It's one of the best desserts out there, I'd say, and I'll fight you on that. So these switches have a lot to live up to. Let's see what they got. These are a 5-pin box stem linear switch manufactured by Haimu, who I've never heard of until now. They have a polycarbonate top housing, palm stem, and nylon bottom housing, so nothing really crazy here. They have an 18mm 63.5 gram spring, which is pretty nice. The long spring makes them feel pretty snappy when pressing. My preference normally leans toward lighter springs. These are more than fine for me and very comfortable for day-to-day use. I'm not gonna lie though, that pink switch has a slightly nicer spring feeling with what I've tested. The main intrigue for me was that they're factory lubed, and of course there are so many factory lube switches out there, some more than others, but apparently according to Internet Man, these are very usable stock and don't need added lube. And while I don't support blindly trusting people on the internet, he was right. These are very nice and smooth out of the box, which is exactly what I was looking for, because there ain't no way I'm spending 4 hours lubing these switches. They have a very consistent factory lube job between all of them, and overall it's just very solid. They don't have that buttery feeling that you get from a more generously hand lubed switch, but they still hardly have any scratch. And when it comes to smoothness, they feel very similar to that pink switch I got. So comparing them to my previous KTD strawberries, those have a much more lubed feeling when stock, if that makes sense. They're both basically just as smooth when actually typing on them, but the strawberries feel more like a lubed switch than the flans do. Honestly, it's kind of hard to explain with words. You'd have to feel it in person. 2 issues I found with the strawberries that made me want to get new switches in the first place is 1, the inconsistency of the lube job. Some of them are straight up mushy, and between switches, there's a lot of variance. And 2, they grew a bit of this chatter noise, presumably in the housing. This also happened in my KTD roses, and it makes it sound much less satisfying. And the flans don't have either of these issues, at least not yet. I tried adding a little bit of lube myself to one of the flans just to see how much it affected it, and it did make the sound just that slight bit more clean and make it just that slight bit more smooth. But to be honest, I don't think it's really worth all that effort unless you're really looking for that peak, zero friction, completely flawless feel. If you give me 5 flans and one of them was hand lubed, I would honestly have a really hard time figuring out which one is actually the hand lubed without putting my ear right next to it, And these also just don't need switch films, so very tight out the box. For the sound, describing is kind of pointless, so here's a sound test comparing it to a bunch of other switches I have. I really like the sound of these. They have a loud, high-pitched, very snappy sound, no chatter, hardly any stem wobble, no spring ping, and pretty lively. They're a tiny bit thin, I'd say. Perhaps they could be a bit fuller, but I don't mind it. It's really nice. And this could also depend on the board, of course. If you couldn't tell by now, the Flans are a mad solid switch. And the best part is, it's only 35 cents per. That's cheaper than every other switch I tested other than the KTT Roses. In short, I'm definitely going to be dailying these switches over all my other linear switches I've tried, and I'd really recommend them for you if you really want a good out-of-the-box stock switch. I really do think that they actually stack up and even beat the KTT Strawberries in my opinion. But if I were to nitpick though, they're not perfect. A little bit of lube will probably make them a tad bit more smooth. The sound could be a wee bit fuller in my opinion, and maybe a slightly different spring would help. But that pink switch might just be the solution to all of that. If only I had a whole batch.